My nerves are shot. Kaput. I'm still shaking and I've had a brandy already. I just need a moment. I have never felt so violated. Violated. Earlier today, well, as little as an hour ago, in fact, I was on the high street in Kinley Village, running errands. I went to the post office to return those late-night purchases I made on Shopping Channel UK, and the queue was unbearably slow. Although, you won't believe who was in front of me. Old Mrs. Bendenschnapp. I thought she was dead. Fine head of intelligence she had on her. A judge she was. Must be nearing 100 or so now. Still has a fine head of blonde hair too, would you believe? Well, Mrs. Bendenschnapp informed me that Sharon's, you know Sharon, from the paper shop, Manjew's on Whitsworth Road, well, she was. Her son, the eldest, he's been dismissed from his post at Lidl. Sorry, Mrs. Bendenschnapp corrected my pronunciation on this. Lidl. Apparently, he was having a fiddle in the middle of Lidl. Oh, yes, with some lass off the checkouts. Whilst the store was open. People in there. Kiddies, too. Although he denies it. Claims she was choking and that he'd got her from behind to dislodge the offending artifact from her gullet. Chewing gum, allegedly. The latter seems rather far-fetched to me, don't you think? Anyway, Sharon reached out to Mrs. Bendenschnapp for advice on the matter. Mrs. Bendenschnapp quite rightly declining to support or get involved. Sharon, after all, is a terrible gossip, and news that Mrs. Bendenschnapp was on side and the whole of Harkshire would be calling on her for representation in their legal matters. She's at the stage of life where she needs to be taking it easy, not taking things on. No sooner than Mrs. Bendenschnapp concluded on the matter, this rude young gentleman, possibly early 20s, although hard to say with the tights on his head, barged in front of me and Mrs. Bendenschnapp, headed straight for the front of the queue. It was 4 deep, with another now behind me. Nothing infuriates me more than impatience in post office queues. He demanded service at the kiosk. I could tell by the look on Wendy's face, the cashier. Lovely girl, but I swear, if you hold her up to your ear, you'd hear the ocean. She was flustered by his ignorance to post-office queuing systems. Mrs. Bendenschnapp could see that I was getting tetchy, insisted I stand down. Don't involve yourself, dear, she asserted. The tight-wearing imbecile then shouted for us to get down on the floor, and for Wendy to draw all his money out, or something like that. They always have the music in there a little bit too loud for me. Sometimes you can't hear yourself think, nor the conversations 2 persons ahead of you. It wasn't too bad today. It was that man I like, Dave, on Totally Wicked Awesome Tunes FM, playing music from the girl groups of the 60s. But when Wendy has her Norwegian death metal CD on, oh, I can feel my fillings rattle, I really can. If you think for one moment that I'm getting down on this carpet wearing cream slacks from flannels, then you have another thing coming, young man. I'm stood in the main thoroughfare of this establishment, and I doubt it's been shampooed in years. He wasn't impressed, and asked me to put my hands in the air instead. With these returns packages? I inquired. He said throw them on the floor. The disrespect, honestly. I placed the parcels down and headed towards him. He demanded I come no further. Fine, I proclaimed. I can say what I need to from here, stood by the carousel displaying the Heights of Harkshire postcard selection. He was furiously flitting his head back and forth in an agitated manner between me and Wendy, who was now filling a bag with his money from the till. I've been coming to this post office since it opened in 1981, the former being on Piper Street. It's no longer there now. There was an issue with the footings due to the Kinley mine, terrible subsidence, and the row of shops there began to crumble. They've since pulled them down, resolved the issue, and it's where you'll find Morrison's today. Despite the post office location changing, the one thing that hasn't changed in all that time is the etiquette of how we queue here. Therefore, I cannot stomach nor tolerate a weedy waif walking all over our customs and demanding to be served ahead of people who have politely queued here for decades, minding their own business, no matter how wealthy you clearly are or how strange your sense of dress. He began perspiring at a rate of knots and looked increasingly agitated. You'd have been better with a more breathable 60 denier tight, really. What are they? 300 at least, I'd say. No wonder you're perspiring at the rate you are. You could pick some up whilst you're here, perhaps. Wendy, do you still stock them? She pointed her shaky hand towards the back of the store. Between the ATM and the fridge magnet selection was a rack of tights. May I also suggest going for a lighter colour? A light tan, perhaps? This darker one you're wearing masks your features somewhat. Also perhaps a matte finish rather than one with too much sheen, as the reflections from the lights making it difficult to see your face clearly. He erupted. Had a meltdown. He shouted, "Fuck it and fuck you," which I thought was a bit unnecessary. With that, he stormed out of the post office. After Wendy had just counted out his money, he left without it. How frightfully rude. Everyone was quite shaken, but thanked me and allowed me to go next, which was kind. But someone has to take a stand when it comes to enforcing standards, and if that needs to be me, then so be it. I then left the post office. It's so terribly upsetting. I'd only got as far as the florist, admiring the gladioli, when... It's all flooding back to me now. I still can't believe the violation. This is a trauma I will carry with me for years to come, I'm sure of it. Possibly the rest of my life. I was attacked. No. Molested. By a goose. It swooped down and savagely humped my leg. In broad daylight. In public. With onlookers with whom I'm familiar. I screamed. It squawked. Oh, it had hold of my leg with its wings as it scoured up at me with a perverse, lustful look in its eye, similar to Keith's expression on his birthday and the second Wednesday of every February. I couldn't free myself from its grip. If it wasn't for Mr. Butcher from the bakery over the road charging over with his rolling pin in one hand and a same-sex wedding cake topper in the other to disturb it from climaxing all over my cream slacks from flannels and chasing it down the street, then who knows what might have become of me. It was a gangly goose. They haven't seen one so large before. It was more like a man in a mascot outfit, if you ask me. Oh, the embarrassment as the Kinley Village people looked on. Scottish Moira, who owns the florist, said, "Oh, lass, there's no need to feel down," as I picked myself up off the ground. All right for her to say, but I was terrified. I could see more gangly geese circling ahead, and the last thing I needed after that ordeal was to become engrossed in a goosey gangbang by the gladioli. I'm just pleased that Mrs. Bendenschnapp didn't witness it. She'd have keeled over, make no mistake. Although, I may contact her to see what my legal rights are. There must be laws against such violations. So, there you have it. That is why I've had to have brandy in my tea today.